I wonder if Loki will be able to shrink. Spoilers for Elbaf, but a little while ago, I did a slew of videos talking about how it might be possible for Loki to have the canonical version of the mini fruit or the mini fruit itself, because the mini fruit is one of those odd filler fruits that have gone from video games into anime filler under the use of very similar characters, because all the characters who have used this power have been giants with some sort of connection to Elbaf, right? And more specifically, Brogy and Dory. But with that being said, after looking at Remo Shifu Killingham's nightmare creatures more closely, I realized that the Nidhogg was the only one with capabilities. It shot lightning, it had powers. So I wondered if Loki was going to have the Dragon Fruit mythical model Nidhogg, and that ended up being the case. However, the whole sizing idea was not unfounded, because we find out that this Nidhogg fruit has a weird eating condition that no other dough fruit has had up to this point. Because if a human eats the Nidhogg fruit, they would turn into a dragon that's a similar size, most likely, to the nightmare creature that Killingham produces, meaning that is the smallest actual outcome that we know of. But then, if a giant eats the Nidhogg fruit, the resulting dragon that they can become would be bigger. And then the biggest result is if a ancient giant like Loki were to eat the fruit. So Loki is the desired candidate, most likely, to have this ability, and it's very likely too that the warrior deity guy before him who had this ability most likely was an ancient giant like him. But with that being said, what's very odd now about Loki having this ability is that he cannot maintain the full beast form of the ability for very long, as in chapter 1178 and again in chapter 1182, he seems to have a fatigue problem while retaining his full beast state, and seems to lose size fairly quickly after a time, even though before fighting Emu, he had fully fueled up on food. But to me, this seems like a very interesting narrative device, similar to how Luffy loses stamina when using Gear 5th. This is something put in place so there's some place for Loki to go for a long period of time, therefore setting him up to be a main character in the series, and therefore most likely a member of the Straw Hat Pirates. Because, and excuse the pun, but there's something to grow here, something to master, something to get better at, seeing as how the basic function of his fruit is not necessarily easy for him to use at this moment in time. So that gives him room to develop that ability further on in the narrative, which sets him up to be a main character, because there's a flaw that needs fixing, therefore it leads to more narrative opportunities. But with that being said too, it's very odd that a eating condition and desired candidates and their sizes are a part of the Nidhogg's whole power scheme if that's not going to be used in the series. I think it will be. That's why I think Loki will get some device in the future that allows him to shrink. Now, the likely candidate for making such a device is most likely Vegapunk, because technically we have two Vegapunks on Elbaf at this time, Vegapunk Lilith and a clone of Vegapunk Stella. So it's very likely, seeing as how Vegapunk has experience with gigantification, he can temporarily reverse gigantification, allowing Loki to become the size of a large human, most likely. Not the size of Big Mom, maybe something the size of Doflamingo, if anything. So with that being said, we can get the full power tour of what the Nidhogg can potentially do. By shrinking Loki down to the size of a human, he might be able to fight as a dragon for longer. And then for bigger confrontations, he can increase his own size and become the size of a giant, and therefore increase the size of the dragon again. And then for going all out to have a final blowout moment, he can return to his original size and therefore make the dragon its maximum size and actually wreak havoc. So that's what I think. And throughout the course of the story, he will most likely get better and better at his stamina management when using the Nidhogg at his full size, but he will most likely always keep the belt because he wants to be a part of the Straw Hat Pirates, and being human size actually allows him to interact with them. So that's what I think will happen. You will have a period of growth with Loki throughout the series, with him getting better and better and managing the maximum size of the Nidhogg, but he'll never get rid of his size changing belt because it actually allows him to interact with his friends. And just to clarify, I do think that the size manipulating device that Vegapunk Lilith and Vegapunk Stella will develop is some sort of belt buckle that Loki can put on his existing belt buckle that will help him alter his size at will. So that's what I'm thinking, because it doesn't really make sense to introduce the stipulations of the Nidhogg fruit if they aren't going to be used in the narrative. It becomes useless information at that point. So the only thing now that I'm wondering for the future is if Ratatoskr, or Ragnar, the user of the Squirrel Fruit mythical model Ratatoskr, I wonder if he can change size as well, because we don't know what Ratatoskr is in the world of One Piece. Is it normally a giant squirrel, or is Ragnar just giant because the hammer is giant, but he can actually shrink down and become normal size? Because if he can't, a belt might have to be fashioned for Ragnar as well, which is possible, but that's just a very funny thought for the Squirrel and Loki to have matching belts. But with that being said, if you are liking the video so far, click the like button. And if you want to see more from me, click the subscribe button followed by that bell so you never miss a video. In addition, if you could, please hit the hype button because it really does help. With that being said, give me your thoughts and tell your friends about Polypede. Exit!